Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining in today's webinar, Departure with Lewis Lim and Christine Coe. I'd first like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land and seas on which we work, live and create, pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to extend my respect to any First Nations people that are joining us today. So my name is Lauren, I work at Flying Arts Alliance and I have the privilege of hosting today's webinar. Lewis Lim and Christine Coe are Brisbane-based Asian Australian visual artists working across photography, installation, public art and community projects. So their community art project, Departure, is what they'll be talking to us about today. Through interviews and workshops, participants from diverse migrant communities were invited to share their stories and create a collective kite installation for exhibition. The project gave voices to participants' experiences by collecting and sharing individual stories with the aim that their stories will contribute to a larger conversation about immigration and race in Australia. I don't want to chew into too much of their time. They've got plenty of wonderful things to say, but I will just mention that there is a chat box feature on your screen. It should be in the bottom corner for you. Please feel free to be using that throughout the webinar today, popping in any questions or comments you have along the way. There will be time at the end for questions, but do feel free to put them in if they pop in your mind as we go along. I will pass over and let you enjoy the webinar.
Thanks, Lauren. Hi, so I'm Lewis.
And I'm Christine.
So today we're joining you from Brisbane, Mianjin. We would also like to pay our respects and acknowledge the elders of Yagara and Turrbal people, as well as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders past and present. So we both are first-generation immigrants, me coming from Malaysia and Christine from Taiwan. And since arriving in Australia, we have both grew up in Mianjin and lived and worked here in the city. So today, our presentation will be about our project Departure. It's a project about migrant stories. But before we get into that, we would also like to share a bit of background about our own individual practices. So for me, as I mentioned, I was born in Malaysia and have moved here when I was a teenager. So one thing led to another. I ended up studying photography in Queensland College of Art and have since been using photography as my main practice. I work as a freelance photographer and as a fine art printer, and at the same time maintaining an art practice. Within my art practice, somehow I was given a lot of opportunity working in community-based projects. So today I'm sharing a few projects that I've worked on in the past, predominantly with communities here. So in this slide here, we have Words Are All I Have. So this is a project that I worked with writers and curator Beth Jackson. The exhibition was curated by artists Kevin Leong and Liz Woods. The exhibition is titled Peace and Quiet, and the exhibition happened in State Library, Queensland, 2015. There are multiple projects that form this exhibition, and Beth and I have worked on this one project in conveying stories of people who have experienced war, but we've centered around our interviews and our projects around the theme of peace and what peace means to them. Beth was the person conducting the interview, and I was photographing, making portraits of each participant using a large format camera. So here we've heard from 10 participants, each with a very compelling stories. We've heard from a 92-year-old pacifist who was a prisoner of war captured by a Japanese soldier and was sent to build the Thai-Burma Railway. We've also interviewed Saba, who was from Eritrea, who was forced to be a child soldier when she was young, but she's now, some of you may have known that she opened up a restaurant in West End, and the restaurant provided employment and training for a lot of refugees women. So the exhibition consists of texts that was printed in a book format that was transcribed from the interview. So you can sit down and read the stories. And in the inside of the cubicle that you see in the slide, you have 10 larger than life-size portraits. Walking into the space is quite confronting because you have 10 people looking at you. But at the same time, I felt that for me personally, in the space, there's a sense of calmness in the space. So the project has made me realize the power that stories hold for people to bridge some form of understanding with one another. So the next project is over a meal. Living in Australia in an Asian household, I had some vague idea that my dinner ritual is a bit different from a typical Anglo-Aussie household. So my family dinners almost always consist of rice and noodles. I had dinner in people's home from various culture background, including Anglo households. And it's always quite interesting having dinner at other people's home. So to indulge my own curiosity, I decided to invite myself into people's houses and watch them eat dinner. And in particular, weeknight dinners. I just thought that the ritual of a weeknight dinner is quite interesting. It's a dinner ritual behind closed door that I was interested in. It's quite revealing, and it does break this idea of a hegemonic Aussie society when we're all so different. But for me, the important point in this project is that often by sharing our differences in experience, we're often also reminded of our similarities. Like, for instance, many of us sit in front of a screen while eating dinner. That kind of goes across board and from different cultures. So back in 2019, pre-COVID era, I was approached by Logan Art Gallery to produce a body of work that looks at the street fashion of Logan. It's quite a beautiful experience walking through the global food market in Logan, and you come across people from all walks of culture, and many of them retain their traditional outfit in their daily life. So Logan is one of the most diverse cities in the world. Last I checked, it has about 234 different cultures, and I was told that it was more diverse than New York City. So the project was set out as a snapshot of how people from Logan look like. I was also mentoring 3 local photographers in this project, and together we've managed to connect with people from various cultural backgrounds, from different age groups, from different subcultures as well. The project has gone through multiple lockdowns and restrictions, and it did eventuate in an exhibition at Kingston Butter Factory Living Museum last year. So for me, community project was often a way to open up conversations of our differences and what we value. I do believe that conversations lead to understanding, and hopefully that leads to a more tolerant society. So I'll pass on to Christine now.
All right, so my practice was always a bit more of a solo practice, and I started off in photography, but I'd always had an interest in space and built form, which was quite evident in the style of photography I was doing. But I reached a point where I felt restricted by the frame and became interested in the idea of creating spatial experiences for people to immerse themselves in rather than taking photos of spaces. So I started developing an installation practice. And around the same time, I realized that I had a lot of baggage around my identity. So both as an Asian Australian and also becoming an artist. And so I ended up processing a lot of those issues through my practice. And so this work is called Retreat. It's an iteration of the first installations I ever made. I was interested in the use of hair and fringing to mask the self, and was inspired by recollections of people making comments about my beautiful Chinese hair when I was a kid and how I used to hide behind my fringe a lot. So I made these installations with hanging strips of black VHS streamers, which concealed a cubby house inside. So the idea was that visitors could choose to move through the hair and discover the hidden world inside. And then so after making a few variations of the streamer installations with the cubby houses, the idea of fringing and concealment evolved into playing with window coverings. And I also became interested in developing works using the basic house structure as a metaphor for the self and as a way to explore a sense of place and belonging. So I came up with this idea of creating a house-shaped structure made from rows of hanging vertical blinds that I made out of mirror film. The blinds were hung so that it formed the shape of a house with an opening through the middle that visitors could walk through. There were 2 videos projected onto either side of the house, and the blinds were motorized, so they were constantly turning, and so that the video imagery was being broken up and moving in and out of visibility. And because the mirror film is reflective, as the blinds turned, they also threw these beautiful reflections on the floor and around the room and created quite a dreamlike atmosphere. And then so I continued on with my interest in using the basic house structure, and I came up with this idea to make these nested acrylic houses, which I called glass houses. So the outer house is just clear acrylic, kind of like a casing, and then the middle house has a printed image, and the inner house is made of translucent acrylic with a light inside, which lights the houses up at night. I ended up developing a few iterations of the glass houses for temporary public art art commissions. And this is the last iteration, which was made for Willoughby City Council in Sydney. This set of houses was looking at the changing idea of home and the great Australian dream of home ownership. And the photos were taken of the various different kinds of housing stock in the suburb of Chatswood, where the work was being displayed. So basically, in a nutshell, I'd say my practice is based around my Asian Australian migrant experience, visibility, home, and belonging. So Lewis and I have worked together professionally for many years. So firstly at the Queensland College of Art, and now as business partners, we're running a creative space and printing lab together. So over the years, we've developed this mutual respect for each other. And as friends, we've been able to give one another critical feedback on each other's artworks, even though our practices are quite different. But I think a big part of what connected us is this shared experience of being first generation Asian immigrants to Australia. So that's my family on the left, who are from Taiwan, and Lewis's family on the right from Malaysia. And so we've had many conversations about our families, our experiences of not feeling like we fit in, things we find weird and funny about Western culture and the art world. And so we thought maybe the migrant experience could be a way we could use to bring our practices together to develop a community art project. So we brainstormed, and I can't remember how it happened, but we landed on this idea of making kites and using them as metaphors to express ideas related to the migrant experience. Because kites, they're like flights of joyous and naive childlike wonder and optimism that is simultaneously at the whim of external circumstances that are constantly buffeted by the surrounding environment that can sometimes lead to deep disappointment, such as a crash landing. So for me personally, the thought of working on a community art project with migrant participants was quite exciting, as making art and being involved in the community has helped me so much with coming to terms with my identity as an Asian Australian. So struggling with feeling caught in between two cultures and not belonging was a pretty big thing for me to deal with. But at the same time, they also seemed like these very ordinary experiences, because they weren't really the kind of things that I saw in the media, unlike the traumatic experiences of asylum seekers and refugees. So I guess I kind of felt like my migrant experience was maybe kind of insignificant, and that I didn't have anything of value to say through my art. But then ironically, it was also art that helped me find my voice. So the thought of being able to facilitate that process for others and to provide a platform for them to share their stories was a big motivator for why I wanted to do this project with Lewis. We knew we wanted to make this community art project, but we also knew that it'd be quite a large undertaking that would require us to seek funding. So we thought we'd just make a small installation first with just a kite from each of us. And so this is what this work is here. We managed to get an opportunity to show in the window gallery at Outer Space in 2022. And I guess this was kind of a test run for us to see whether the kites worked visually and to gauge audience response.
Yeah, so the concept was to have each of us creating our own kites. And the installation, we did have a rough visual idea, but it's only until we were there at the space that eventuates to how it looks like. But we also thought that, for me, I had a few experiences as a kid flying kites that the string would have broke, and then the kite would have crash land, as Chrissy mentioned before. But also I have a vague experience that one of my kite has caught in the tree. And so I thought that it would be kind of a nice idea to bring in a tree branch to have one of the kite being caught in this tree branch. And it's also a metaphor for most migrant about the migration process, that you often go through multiple hurdles and it's rarely a smooth sail in the process. So here are some details of the kite. So on the left, it's my kite. The design of the kite, in the background, it's with a whole lot of family archive photos of me growing up. What's visible in the front, it's a combination of two emblems, the Malaysia emblems and the Australia emblems. And I positioned them so that the kangaroo and the tiger are kind of in this position where they're also looking like they're in the fighting stance, which I resonate with the clash of culture differences and also the identity struggle. The frame of the kite is actually based off a Malay kite, and but also on the more positive notes that the emblem kind of signifies this blending of two cultures.
So that's my kite on the right there, and I went with quite a generic diamond shape and the tail with the bow ties because I wanted it to be instantly recognizable. So like the most basic childish representation of how we imagine kites to look like. And the photo is of my family in the 80s, and it would have been taken shortly after we arrived in Australia. And it's actually of us outside the Queensland Art Gallery where I spent a lot of time as a kid. So the photo was quite meaningful, I felt, now that, I've ended up working in the art space.
So we've also added some tails to both our kites. So mine kind of have this phoenix tail-like shape. There's two of them, and I positioned the other side of the animal, the emblem, in each side. So I was thinking also that this idea of phoenix going through a new place and then getting reborn in some way is a bit of a cliche, but I think the idea of us migrants coming to Australia seeking a new life was my thinking behind it.
And so my tail, you probably can't see it very well in the picture, but I made these bow tie shapes out of scans of my Taiwanese and Australian passports. So it's like a mix of both of my cultures in there. And I also added these tassels, which are made out of this like white plastic string that's commonly used in Asia for packaging. And so I have this like vivid memory of my mother making these like pom-poms for my sister out of this string when we were in Taiwan. And so for me, I think it just has this very strong resonance with my Chinese heritage. And then so our aim with this project was always to develop it into a larger community project where we could work with migrant participants from a variety of backgrounds and get them to create their own kites that we could form into a larger installation. So through the success of our little installation with just our 2 kites, we were successful in getting a Creative Sparks grant to make the first community project come to life. So we did that this year. And so the first thing we had to do was find participants. We ended up with 9 participants, all Brisbane-based, who we got in touch with through our personal networks. Ideally, we would have liked to work with the wider scope of people beyond our own networks, but we were limited with time. So hopefully in the future, we can find interested participants through more public call-outs. We also made a decision to limit participants to first and second generation immigrants with permanent residency, as it's the experience we're familiar with, and we thought would help turn, it would, by having this shared experience, it helped turn the interview process into more of a conversation where we could open up discussions through sharing of mutual experience. And also, like I mentioned with my own experience, there are these very quite ordinary experiences that don't get much visibility, unlike those of refugees and asylum seekers. And I also didn't feel they were our stories to share. And there's also a level of trauma that often comes with those refugee and asylum seeker experiences that I didn't feel like we were equipped to deal with. So when designing the participants, we tried to choose people from a variety of cultural backgrounds and age groups who migrated at different times. So Anna and Tom are a couple from Spain who were our oldest participants. Anna first came in the early 1970s when she was 21 with her first husband. And she ended up going back to Spain where she met and married Tom, and they both migrated back to Australia in the early 1980s. Then we had Matt, who's Taiwanese. His parents migrated to Australia in 1985, and he was born here the following year. We have Tammy, whose family is Chinese, but she was born in and grew up on the Sunshine Coast in the 1980s. Then we have Hui, who was born in Vietnam in 1981, and his family were failed boat people. They ended up arriving in Australia by plane in 1986. And then we had another couple, Masimba and Cece, who were from Zimbabwe. So Cece came to Australia after she finished high school in 2003 to study at university. She met Masimba in South Africa, and they got married and had planned to stay in South Africa, but ended up making the decision to move their family to Australia. And Masimba is actually our most recent migrant. He came during the COVID lockdowns. And lastly, there's Nerea and Nicole, 2 sisters of Mexican background who were our youngest participants. So Nerea is 13, Nicole is 10. Nerea was born in Mexico and moved to Australia with her parents when she was a baby, and Nicole was born in Brisbane.
We line up with each participant a time to conduct an interview with them, and quite often it happens at their place. Some of them happen in our studio, but mostly we kind of like this relaxed setting of their home and also just chatting about their experience in their personal space. Quite a few of them we've actually had dinner beforehand, so it's more relaxed in that setting. And the purpose of the interview was to chat about each participant's everyday experience growing up in Australia and coming from a migrant background. With the interview, we had written down a set of questions for the interview. Some example of the questions are, what is your earliest memory of being in Australia? Did you feel accepted when you first came to Australia? Is there any particular experience you can share? Also, do you feel like you belong to Australia? But the process was more conversational and more intuitive, and we have often shared our own personal anecdotes as well.
Yeah, so I think the interviews, we sort of try to keep it, just had a very loose structure so that we could leave it open for, other things to emerge, that we could just talk and go on other tangents.
So someone we would like to acknowledge as well is Kian. Kian has helped us a lot in this project. So Kian is often in the background for all the interviews, and he's sitting out of frame filming us and also recording our conversation. He's also came from a migrant background. He has moved here to Australia from South Africa, and sometimes they join in the conversations as well. So at this stage of the project, we knew that we would like to use the audio recording to transcribe into text and somehow use the text in the project. But we weren't sure how we were going to use the video component, but just thought that having the video recording would be good for our own archive. So from the audio recordings, our friend Sarah, who's worked as a text transcriber, has also helped us convert the audio into text, which Christine is going to talk about next.
Yeah, so with the community iterations of the project, we always knew the interviews would be an integral part of the exhibition, but for a while we couldn't agree on how best to present them. So whether we would have them as printed text on the wall or as video or audio works. But in the end, we came up with this idea of turning each interview into letters, like physical objects that exhibition visitors could handle and open and read. We thought the letter format would be a more intimate way for the audience to engage with each participant's story. So it's like they're being told directly to you as you read them. So basically, I got the transcriptions that Sarah did for us, edited the text and formatted each conversation so it sounded like you were reading a letter from the participant. And then I made envelopes for each letter with the old school airmail border and stamps. And because I used to be big into pen paling, I was a bit of a postal nerd. So I knew Australia Post had different stamps for different regions around the world. So I found digital files of stamps that corresponded with the region that each participant came from, and then overlaid a postmark of the country they were from to individualize each envelope. And then so this is just all the letters that we had made for this iteration of the project, how we had exhibited them.
We thought we'll share some of what the participants had to say. So I'm just going to read you an excerpt from Hui's interview. So this is Hui's voice here. I definitely felt the conflict between my two cultures growing up. From grade 2, probably all the way till mid-uni, I always wanted to be more white in everything I did, everything I thought. I was thinking I want to be more mainstream, but now I'm getting older, I'm the opposite. I value my Asian traditions, my Asian values. I'm just respecting things a lot more as I'm older. I definitely embrace my Asian culture and my Asian heritage a lot more now. And now fighting convention for me is fighting Western conventions. Now, I do feel like I belong in Australia. I think Australia is much more multicultural now and much more accepting. And I definitely feel like I've created my space. That's what I've always kind of fought for, to find a place and space for myself and make sure that that space is something that you hold yourself. You don't owe somebody else to do it. And I feel like everything I've done in my life, I've done on my own to make sure it's my space nobody gets to take away from me. But at the same token, I feel like I have to fight for that part of Australia. It's not naturally given to me. I feel like you have to earn it. And probably with a lot of migrants, I feel like they have to earn it. It's not a given right.
And then so we have an excerpt from Cece from Zimbabwe. She says, in Australia, when I say I'm Australian, it comes with, but I came, I wasn't born here. It's like I attained my Australianness from my passport and how long I stayed here, not because I feel a connection with the land. I can't say that Zimbabwe feels like home either, because I've been away since 2003, over 20 years. I've spent more time outside of Zimbabwe than I've spent in Zimbabwe, so now it doesn't really feel like home. But the fact that there are other people that look like me, that is a big draw. And there's open spaces. The challenges of raising children are different in Zimbabwe. To have somebody look after your kids is not as expensive as in Australia, and family values or things that you hold dear are more similar in Zimbabwe than here. So the big draw is just the similarities in thought, but it's just not feasible to go back home.
So this leads us to the next stage of the project, which is making the actual kites. So after the interview, we've discussed with each participant the kite design, and we talk about what sort of kite frame they like. Sometimes we do suggest to them with some options. Other times they have some clear idea of what they want. So on the left here, we have a kite from Anna. Anna has picked this frame, and it's based off a paharita. a Spanish bird origami that symbolizes freedom from the Franco regime. Tom, who's Anna's husband, who's very good at handiwork, has also helped us test out a few frame ideas. So one thing to note is that our aim wasn't to have the kites flying, but using the kite as a work of art and installing that as in an exhibition. So it didn't really concern us too much with the aerodynamic of the kite. We've also chatted with everyone about using their family photos for the kites. We thought that instead of us making the images, which I would normally do as a photographer, that the visuals should represent their stories and their personal history. So family archive photos make sense in this case. We've gone through quite a lot of images with the participants, sometimes throw through their own archive and send us some of the images. Some participants knew exactly which image they want to use for the kite. As for the others, they weren't sure. So we have worked in different format with different people in this sense. So here is a screenshot of the base template of the kite design composition. So from the images, we have then drafted various different composites. So here is what I've done with Cici. So Cici had decided to use a photo of her family when she was young and with her parents. And then just posing next to it is a recent photo of her partner Simba and her 2 kids. So some of the other kites, we were given the images and we kind of use our own discretion in designing something and then sending back to them to make a change from their feedback. So there's a bit of a trial and error, a back and forth to make sure that they're happy with how they were represented in the visuals. From the kite design, we then printed them using a large format printer. So we printed them on a matte paper. So on the left is a print image. And we have learned that from our own kites that if we apply wax on the matte paper, it actually makes it translucent. So it gives you this translucent effect that you can somehow backlit and see through it, which we kind of like that effect. So Christine and I have both went through and applied wax to the prints. So the way that we did it was that we crushed up candle wax and then sprinkled it on top of the print and then ironed it. There might be better ways of doing this, but this is the way that we figured out doing in the large prints.
It's a bit messy and tedious, but I think we did okay.
Yeah.
So after we'd made the kite frames and prepared the wax paper with the participants' images, we invited them to take part in a kite making workshop where we could help them finish and assemble their kites. Ideally, we would have liked to get all the participants to do the workshop together so they could meet each other and have further conversations while looking over each other's photos and kites. But we couldn't find a time that suited everyone. So in the end, we pretty much worked with them one-on-one. So logistically, it was easier if we prepared the kite and printed images for them beforehand. But we thought getting them to make the tail could be a really fun thing for them to do that'll help them personalize their kites. Some participants had a really clear idea of what they wanted, but others needed a bit of guidance. So this is Nicole and Nerea at their workshop working on their tails. Nicole knew she wanted colorful bows for her tail and so went about making them straight away. But Nerea wasn't really sure what she wanted, so we spent a bit of time chatting to her and giving her some suggestions. And in the end, she was happy to have bees for her tail, as beekeeping is an important part of her mother's family back in Mexico. So this is just Nerea and Nicole with their finished kites at the end. So this is Hui making his kite. Hui was quite interesting actually because I felt like he ended up being like a modeled participant. I wasn't actually sure how involved and engaged he would get into the process because he's probably the participant that's most removed from the art world. But he was actually very open during our conversations and he had a very clear idea of the design he wanted for his kite. Like he knew he wanted a kite in the shape of a plane and paper boats for the tail, as these symbols were key to his experience. And while making his kite, we also had the opportunity to chat further. And he mentioned his participation in the project made him realize how much his life choices had been affected by his immigrant experience. And it also inspired him to talk to his mother about her experience trying to come to Australia from Vietnam on a boat with their family. And it was something he had never really done prior to his involvement in the project. And it helped him realize how traumatic the experience was for her and to have more empathy towards her. So the workshops ended up being more than just about making kites. They were also a really good opportunity to have further conversations with the participants to reflect on the process and get feedback from them. So hearing the positive impact the project had on we was just made me feel like the project was really worthwhile. So here's just a few more of the kites afterwards. So there's Tom's kite on the left, Tammy with her kite in the middle, and Masimba's kite on the right.
So these, just sharing the kites final outcome. So every kite has various anecdotes that kind of represents their identity and their stories. So Masimba's kite, it consists of his family photos, and the tail is actually the colors of the Zimbabwe's flag. We also have the one on the right, Tammy's kite, and she has used this antique Big W plastic bag that her mum used to store things in.
Well, because she said also Big W was a really big
thing.
part of growing up because they lived next door to a Big W, and so they were constantly at the Big W.
I think her mum managed to find this plastic bag and
that she'd had since like the 90s or something.
Yeah, and we've made that into a tassel for the kites. And Cece's kite on the left, we have also used this fabric that she brought back from South Africa. And so that's a kind of a symbolism of the cultures as well. Tom's kite on the left, the shape of the kite is actually based on a Spanish kite frame. And the colors is the Spanish color. And also with the tail, Tom has worked as a tradesman all his life. So it was actually sandpapers that is folded in half and formed into this tail. Anna in the middle, Anna's an artist, painter, printmaker, and art is quite vital to her life. And so we thought that the kite, instead of just using the family photos, also incorporate her artworks. Yeah, so just some of the little elements that I thought we'll share with you. So from all those kites, we then put together an exhibition, and we're lucky enough that the exhibition was part of Brisbane Art and Design program. So we had an opening night, and the installation was in our studio space. There's this rustic warehouse space that we were inviting people to come and see the work and also have conversations about the work. So the kite was installed. So we knew that we wanted it suspended from the ceiling. We knew that we wanted backlit. So it was lit with light bulbs above the kite. And the kite was also in this formation where it's directed flying out of the warehouse, collectively flying outwards to the open space. Yeah, so here just a few more views of the kite and how it looks like in the space.
Yeah, and then so these are the letters and how that we had as part of the exhibition. So they were displayed to the side, and we had a number of stools underneath so that visitors could pick up each letter and have a place to sit and read through them all.
Yeah, we weren't sure if people were going to read the letters, because there's often in exhibitions people doesn't really want to touch, and also especially in opening events people doesn't quite have the patience to read.
Yeah, I think people are usually too busy socializing. So yeah.
But in the exhibition there was actually quite a lot of people opening up the letters and spending quite a lot of time reading the letters and reading the stories.
Yeah, actually quite a lot of people ended up just sitting there and just sort of like waiting for the next letter to be available. So I think we were quite pleasantly surprised like how engaged people were with all the stories.
Yeah, and we have the exhibition open for a couple months after the opening night, and there was a few people that came in and just sat and just read the letters, and a few of them has responded with it's quite surprising for them like some of these experiences existed. So it's quite heartwarming in some way that knowing that the letter has somehow worked.
And we also had a lot of people asking whether the letters would be available to access online. So I think making an online archive is probably something we'd like to consider doing in the future.
So here, these are some images from the opening event. So there are a lot of friends and family of the participants that came and visit as well. Quite a few of them were really proud of their kites. Especially Nicole, the youngest of our participants. She sees this as her first exhibition, like her work is being presented in the exhibition space. Masimba and Cece's kids was there, and they were really excited about their kite, and they keep saying it's their kite.
Yeah, seeing their faces on the kites. Yeah. I think it was just like a very heartwarming night.
Yeah, just some more images of the opening event. We've also shared snippets of the project on Instagram, and we know that they will resonate with the migrant background. The response was actually quite good. We've got a friend who have shared with me that her cousin from Canada has also shared the work. So there was something that was a bit surprising to us.
Yeah, like I think we kind of knew that this was something that would resonate with a lot of people, but I don't think we really expected the scope that it ended up having.
Yeah.
So I think we feel like it's been quite a successful project, and hopefully we can do a lot more iterations in different places, so that's quite specific to each community that we visit. So yeah, we'll just see how things go in the future.
So I think we'll finish there, and if there's any questions and feedback, happy to answer them. I'm not sure if anyone has typed in their questions, as nothing came through yet.
Not yet, but people are welcome to ask questions now if they would like to. While we wait for people to pop their questions in, I do have a question myself.
Sure.
You spoke a lot about how rewarding it was to be speaking with these people and sharing their stories, but what do you think the most challenging part of the project itself was?
I think there's a lot of negotiation in the project. So I think the most challenging part was to make sure that what we present is respecting the participant wishes. So I think there's a lot of nuances that we had to deal with in terms of how best to represent that. There are some instances where people have said something in the interview, but then later on thought about it and then go, oh, can you not show certain parts? So there are elements like that we have to go through and negotiate with the participants, but it's all based on good faith, I think. So it wasn't too much of a burden on us. It's just
I think we just wanted to make sure the participants were all happy with how they were represented.
Yeah.
But I think also some of the issues were just really banal things like trying to schedule times with everyone or the administrative kind of things. Yeah. I think working with so many participants and scheduling was probably something that ended up taking a lot more time than we had thought it would.
Yeah, quite enjoyable, I think.
Yeah.
For people that might be considering doing some sort of community arts project, how much would you say is the admin side versus the actual creating and developing?
Probably like half of it, I think.
Yeah, probably more than half.
Yeah, I think especially when there's a grant involved. Yeah.
A lot of it was about having conversations with people. It contributes to the project. It's this back and forth conversations about how the project should be and what are the concerns from both parties and how visually that should be representing and respecting the community. So I think a lot of times is based on that.
Well, it seems as though you have answered everyone's questions throughout the presentation. We haven't got anything in the chat box. So it looks like we might be able to have a little bit of an early mark from today. So yeah, if you do have further questions or feedback and you're too nervous or don't want to type them out, you're welcome to send them through to Flying Arts and we're able to pass them on and there might be some further discussion. The best email address would be program@flyingarts.org.au. And then while you're at it, you may as well give us some feedback. We'd love to hear how the webinars go and how you as an attendee experience them and what you get out of them. So if you do have any feedback for us, please feel free to send that through. We would love to be reading it. But for now, are there any other quick comments you'd like to leave with us?
I think Anna's written something quite nice here. So she just said that. So Anna's daughters, Nerea and Nicole, participated, and she just wanted to say that they really enjoyed being part of it, but also their family back in Mexico loved reading the stories. A few tears were shed. So yeah, that's really awesome.
Oh, how beautiful. Well, we might say goodbye here. If you did enjoy this webinar, we do have more coming up and we'll be releasing our program for next year at some point, and there'll be plenty more in 2024 as well. So feel free to jump on our website and have a look at that. But from Flying Arts, we'd like to say thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you again sometime soon.